This is Codified Wisdom. Conversations with leaders sharing what experience has taught them and what they know now that they wish they knew earlier. Hosted by Eric Eager, CEO and co-founder of 4Impact Data.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Codified Wisdom. And as we do with each one of these, we explore the journeys and lessons behind leaders and how they shaped, how they're shaping the future, but also talk about kind of their journey. How did they get to where they're at? What choices do they make? And today's guest, again, is a friend of mine, has an incredibly interesting background and story. He's probably one of the, I guess in the idea, he's like the most interesting man alive, like Dos Equis. My friend Richard Margolin, he's a business leader, investor, operator of Highwire Capital, but he has spent his career helping organizations navigate growth, innovation, transformation. And you talk about somebody at the intersection of technology and human potential. Many of his intervention, many of the things that he's done in innovation and especially education space, Richard's been recognized his leadership in the role of Robokind, where he used the combination of AI-driven robotics and learning technologies to support students and educators in more human-centric ways. But what makes his perspective and his ability to see beyond technology itself, and he can focus on innovation, but can create lasting value for people, organizations, community, value for people, organizations, and communities. So today we're going to walk through Richard's personal journey. He's an old friend, and he's just got all sorts of amazing stories. But glad to have you on. Appreciate you on here. And much like I always start with everybody, let's start at the beginning. Where'd you grow up, and what started you on this at a young age of early influencers, leadership, innovation, opportunity? Where did it all start? And let's just start from the beginning.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Eric. In terms of the beginning, I guess the question is, how far do we want to go back? I grew up here in Dallas, Texas. Left, didn't think I was going to come back, and ended up back here and have built, a bunch of interesting and fun businesses over the years, and have found it to be a pretty incredible environment to do so. In terms of, I think early influences, obviously both my parents, heavy influence and heavy supporters of a lot of the things I've done, even very, starting very young. Both my parents are entrepreneurs and have, built organizations, businesses, things like that. And so I really was really fortunate to have that modeled for me and to get to, see a lot of it growing up, and, not a lot of the true reality of it, the ups and downs, that, it's not an easy sort of thing to do. And, then over time, I've had, I think, a lot of different, heavy influences and mentors in my life across a lot of the strange and interesting things I've done. I just turned 40 years old. I started my first business when I was 13. So I've been doing this for my age, I think, longer than most, and have also had the fortune and opportunity and benefits to do a lot of different things over the years in a lot of different spaces, and I'm a growth junkie, a builder, and so a lot of times I've been doing more than one thing at a time. At the same time, I started my first business, which was a duct tape apparel business. If you remember the kind of duct tape wallet fad of the early 2000s, I built a company that designed and manufactured duct tape wallets, purses, handbags, things like that. But at the same time, I was also working in a genetics lab during the Human Genome Project, and so I've had a lot of crazy opportunity, kind of to do a lot of different things at once. exposed very early to a lot of opportunities, and I've really I've been fortunate by the number of people that gave me chances and opportunities, especially as young as I started in some of those spaces.
So let's back up a minute because I
Yeah.
think it's and I always love these just kind of things you drop that. So you've got a duct tape wallet company,
Hmm.
and then you're in the Geno lab.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So
that's not very, I wouldn't put those two together, but
yeah.
let's unravel that a little bit. Entrepreneurial bug. You're doing duct tape wallets, and I can see that for somebody at that age.
Hmm.
But Geno lab. I mean, how did you get into that at such a young age?
Yeah, I was really fortunate. There was a lab at UT Southwestern. It was the Biotech and Informatics lab that was working on the Human Genome Project. They were doing 21st chromosome, if yeah, and they did a high school internship every summer, and a guy I knew had that internship the summer before, and kind of introduced me to the guys who were doing it, and got in there and learned a lot that first summer. And I guess I was the first person after the summer was over who asked if I could stay and keep working. And so I stayed there for a while until the Human Genome Project ended for that lab at least, which was '02. And along the way, I got to jump in and do a lot of different crazy stuff, well beyond kind of my age and experience. From wet lab genetics. One of the projects I worked on was a canine morphology project, so dog genetics, but also 3D scanning canine skulls and using some of the most advanced 3D software at the time. Got to dabble in kind of early AI as well in that lab, developing some, kind of early neural networks to help identify beginning of and end of gene sequences because we didn't know much back then on the genetic front. We were just mostly starting to collect the data to figure out what to do with it and how to learn from it. And so, was able to do that, and then the duct tape wallet thing started really as a hobby where I made one for myself, and then some friends wanted them, and then the demand grew to a point where I had to start charging for them, and then I started hiring people to help me make them and develop some real like kind of assembly, design, and manufacturing processes, and it really surprisingly kind of became its own real thing and its own real business.
So,
Um,
so you're getting early. All right, so you're the product of entrepreneurs,
mhm.
which is always good, to have that support mechanism
Yeah,
of hey, there's going to be some hardship, there's going to be some failures, and so you got that kind of hardwired from the very beginning, and then you start on this just wildly different spectrums of entrepreneurship.
mhm.
Tell me a little bit more, because I've been lucky enough to understand some of the other projects you've worked on. So, 13, you're doing duct tape wallets, you're starting to look at genes and the Geno labs, and then you're doing early visibility and so maybe early AI capabilities.
Yeah.
What were some other things that you were starting to get introduced in this early time frame? And I know there's a lot, but just
Yeah.
kind of hit the highlights of what are some other interesting things you were doing, during that time frame that started to pique your curiosity of, hey, I can be an entrepreneur, but I can also have, global impact on some things.
Yeah, I think in terms of some of kind of the early things I started to realize and understand was, and especially, learned a lot doing the duct tape stuff. Um, it was once I got to the point where I was hiring people and figuring that out and really kind of, figured out how to start delegating aspects of the work, the business, et cetera, to other people, that really taught me, nothing revolutionary, but just that's the way the better you do that and the earlier you do that, the less work you have to do yourself on it, which frees you up for other things, but you can't be an expert in everything. And the earlier you bring in, more specialists and people who can really help people with, real experience doing, whether it's basic operation setup, with the production stuff, helping set up, real kind of production process, things like that. Helped me, I think, accelerate in ways that, had I just been stuck with the, teenager in my room putting duct tape wallets together for people at night, obviously that never would have turned into, more than a hobby. And I think, and then also working in these laboratories. One of the greatest things I think in that first laboratory I worked in, and some of the others I was fortunate enough to work in as well, was we had to, even for me as a 13, 14-year-old, at least once a month, we had to present our work to the entire lab. And so that really helped me start learning how to kind of synthesize and put information together and kind of tell the story side of it and share this information in a coherent way. And it really also kind of helped me learn, early public speaking in a way that I never would have otherwise. And I, I don't think I was the best communicator at that age. I don't know that anyone is, but I
Yeah,
certainly didn't
no.
have that naturally. But I just had to put in the reps, and in those environments where I had to present regularly to, you know, literally, PhD candidates, postdocs, guys running, well-funded laboratories and all this other stuff, and behave and present in the same ways that all of them were on the same sort of stuff on my piece of, what we were all doing together, really helped me understand how to kind of put the, later, I guess, put the pitch together and all of that. And then also very fortunate, a lot of help, I'll say, from my mother, who both has a communications degree, has done a lot where she was public facing and had to speak publicly, and also taught communications at several universities. And so I kind of had this back pocket coach, and she made sure in a very motherly but diligent way that I learned those skills, whether I wanted to or not. So
As we do at those younger ages, we go,
yeah.
why this is not, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this.
Hmm.
And then you look back and you go, hey, thanks, Mom. I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. It's like I learned very early, whether it was with speaking or anything else, that, no one starts out by walking out on stage and just putting together a, incredible talk. Like, the stuff you never see, or the hours of, standing in front of the mirror, recording yourself on your computer, honing stuff in and getting it done. And then, once you've done that a lot, it gets easier, and you don't necessarily have to put in as many reps for the next thing and the next thing, but it still takes, work, dedication, and just practice like anything else. And, I think that has really kind of taught me that, anything I saw that was valuable enough to really learn, that there was a path to get good at it, and nothing was kind of, unaddressable, basically.
So, and you're already doing amazing stuff that many people work like their lifetime.
Hmm.
And you're presenting in front of PhD, which, I mean, it would be intimidating in my age to, have this. Well, now you get to the point where like, you're
Yeah.
just people. But at that age, you're presenting in front of some, let's just say it could be very intimidating for
Yeah.
somebody at that age. And then, and then it just kind of unlocks this like why not mentality on things.
Yeah.
And and I know there's some things early at that career where you were doing coding, you were doing, and you started to let's just say help in different areas. And I think you were talking like some nano and some other stuff a long
Yeah.
time ago. And so you were doing this stuff before um, what I want to say when it was cool. Before it was cool, you were already dabbling in a lot of these topics of AI and nanotechnology and some of these other things.
Hmm.
Tell me a little bit about, your interest in that. You, you go off and you study cognitive and computational neuroscience.
Hmm.
Okay. You're doing that. And at the same time, one of the things you're starting to learn about is robotics and
Yeah.
playing with robotics, neuroscience. And one story, one of many adventures is that I love to learn more about is that they asked you to build emperor penguins and so that you could create a camera unit to study how they basically interacted and talk a little bit about like how did you get involved in that and in this I imagine it started to pull together some of the robotics, some of these other things are starting to pull together, and we'll get to what I thought was one of the most exciting companies that you helped from an education and helping kids. How did you get involved with building video robot penguins?
Yeah. So, I mean that, there's a lot there that we've kind of jumped over, but I mean basically, so started kind of first taste of robots, I guess, was when I was studying neuroscience, joined a robotics, club team sort of thing, and I've always liked building physical stuff, and so robots really kind of uh, tickled a lot of that because it was, design, build, see it work, see it move, troubleshoot, all of that sort of stuff. When I came back to Dallas, I started out as an intern at a humanoid robotics company called Hanson Robotics, and we were building the most human realistic kind of social robots. I think probably still to date, and got to really dive, relatively small team, got to jump in pretty early and quickly and take on a lot of different aspects of the work, from design to hands-on building and working with incredible teams of people with incredible experience across robotics, movie special effects, all kinds of other stuff that really showed me and taught me how to, I think, marry the what I would call the art aspects or the kind of aesthetic aspects of, these kind of almost sculptural elements and turn them into these interactive, moving, awesome, systems and machines and things like that.
And
Um,
what time frame are we talking about? I mean, because this stuff is very, very, very current.
yeah, this was
What
like
year? What?
2008 is when I started
Okay,
working.
so it's a while back that
Yeah,
this is 2008 time frame,
yeah.
not 2026 time frame. So
No,
this is
no.
early, early.
Yeah, yeah. And we were, I mean, it's I mean, it's a lot better and frankly a lot easier to build a lot of this sort of technology now. There's a lot more kind of resources and tools both on the hardware and software that make it easier and faster to jump into this stuff. But, we were developing huge amounts of this from scratch and using, you know, open source projects. And, when I was at that company, uh, we were, simulating these things and got the opportunity, which was kind of crazy, at that age, to work with, Weta, the, New Zealand-based VFX house that did a lot of stuff for The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and all this other kind of stuff. They helped develop some of the simulation stuff with us, and got to just the with all, I think a lot of the things that kind of have been incredible for me and have given me a lot of opportunity is the breadth I've been exposed to along the way of, especially being in these smaller companies, research teams, et cetera. You're in those environments and you don't really get the opportunity to just become the specialist in one thing. And so you're constantly learning, you're constantly evaluating, what you can do, what everyone else can do, and figuring out how to share the load. And that, can change project to project and day to day, and sometimes you just got to jump in and help on stuff. Because there's literally no one else to do it. And so that's when I feel like I've always learned the most, is when there's literally no one else around, someone needs help, and the person I get to help is, an incredible expert in whatever they've done. I had a guy I worked with at Hanson who had been ILM and Winston Studios special effects guy, and he had worked on, you know, all kinds of crazy movies and TV and stuff, Ghostbusters and Blade Runner and all these other things, and really kind of seeing how guys like that approach different problems and tasks, and also learning, we did a lot of stuff that ended up with like museum installations and that kind of stuff, and also learning how to think through how long does this thing need to actually last? How close are people going to be when they see it? I.e., how much detail and finished work is justified in putting into it. And so, like, it really taught me, I think, an evaluation process of trying to understand. We all have limited time, availability, effort, skill sets, and so it's really where is the most value in terms of I've got a deadline, I've got a deliverable, I've got a whatever.
Yeah.
If I know that in reality, no matter what happens, we're going to hit 95% and not really get all the way there, what's the most important 95%?
So
It's 80/20 rule to some extent, but it's really, in order to kind of, as I kind of even there rose through the ranks to become their engineering director after just a few years, learning how to project manage and lead and all these other things while also still being in the weeds on everything. It
wow.
taught me to really maintain across a lot of the stuff I've done where, I'm kind of in some part of the leadership and decision making tree, to really maintain a mental model of the entire system, basically, so that, I'm asking the right questions and asking for the right kinds of things, and then supporting where I can.
So wow. Okay. So you're at a robotics company. You are
Mm,
rising through there. You're exposed to people who have either worked on a number of movie projects, and then obviously it's kind of cool to get to work with the Hobbit,
yeah,
and the people in New Zealand, which being somewhat of a geek, I'll call myself a self-professed geek. That's like really cool.
yeah,
And then at some point you're more opportunities are presented to themselves, so you have to make these decision points
yeah.
in life of, hey, there's a potential change. There's something else I want to do. What was one of those where, hey, I'm here, I'm doing well, but then there's a new opportunity, and you go, hey, I'm gonna lean into this more.
Yeah. So I think the biggest one for me was, a lot of our customers, at that company were university research groups. We had kind of a weird mix of university research groups, celebrities and ultra high net worth individuals who wanted these robots. I ended up working with a lot of the university research groups and supporting research projects, and a lot of them were in the autism space. And that kind of, I started to see over and over again, as well as getting deep into kind of the historical research on using technology broadly and robots more specifically, to support, help, and educate people with autism in a lot of different ways. And there were, research projects out there besides like the stuff I was supporting, where people had built other robots and stuff like that, but it was all really small scale. But there was already at that point, this would have been about 2010, 2011, 35, 40 years of research into the space. And there wasn't really anyone who had looked and said, "Hey, can we turn this into something real and get it out into the world in a way that can help and support people, on a mass scale?" And so we'd already been working on some smaller, kind of more toy-like, less expensive robots at Hanson, but there wasn't a kind of clear path to product for that. And I really saw an opportunity and really wanted to build something that kind of could be practical and applicable, today immediately, not as a future pie in the sky, wouldn't this be nice, more research forever kind of thing. And so that's kind of, I guess, the bridge into Robokind, which really, it started early 2011. I had kind of worked with the founder, David Hanson at Hanson Robotics, to kind of license a lot of the IP around some of these smaller robots that we'd been creating, with the real kind of core focus for using these in education, using these for special needs support. And at that point, kind of was able to start Robokind up as its own entity with that really narrow and dedicated focus. And kind of the big goals we knew we needed to tackle and accomplish were, a real lower cost, mass producible piece of hardware, which you can see behind
Yeah.
me,
That's,
one of those robots.
and that's Milo, isn't it?
That's Jemmy.
Okay.
Milo is
And
there's
yeah, there's
Milo.
Milo.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. So
Sorry,
that's how
editors,
we
for the
started to
camera
become,
move.
yeah, and that's
Yeah.
how we got to know each other. Is
Yeah.
that I had uh, a passion for helping in education, and
Yeah.
there was a growing population of special needs students, and even my own family, my own twins are on, have components of being on the spectrum.
Hmm.
And it is, for a lot of parents, it is incredibly challenging, especially, with neuroscience and trying to understand the gifts that kids and parents and, people that are on the autism spectrum. It's just their brains wired a little different, which they also have extraordinary gifts that they have. And but you are tackling not only robotics, but then now this is where the neuroscience comes in. That I don't know of anybody on the planet that starts to combine those combinations with the idea to help parents and kids. And that's how we got connected.
Yeah.
And you started, so your Robokind, you started to get some traction, you're starting to do some things, you're learning about manufacturing, you're learning, and you already knew this, but now you're taking that next level.
Yeah.
Talk about some of the uh, early and continued successes there, but also some business lessons learned, that as you're going through, and that it's an amazing product and everything, but getting that to market, but also dealing with investment and dealing with manufacturing. At the same time, you're winning all sorts of, Entrepreneur of the Year awards and Tech Titan awards and these other things.
Yeah.
How did you manage and what were some of the lessons learned through that process?
Yeah. I mean, I think, Robokind was like one, it was the first thing I really had to raise capital for, because hardware is expensive and, mass production, tooling, all those kinds of things are expensive. So is prototyping and development and all of that. And so, when I started Robokind, I was, despite all the other things I'd done at that point, I was still mostly in like a, design engineer headspace. But as we got, kind of the first early robots done, and the early days, we were building a lot of concepts, building some more expensive robots, but that could be built faster, and using those both as platforms to start testing out material and content. Obviously, I was fortunate from some of the other work I'd done previously. I had a good network of autism researchers and professors and experts in the space and things like that. And so, a lot of it, besides the just the technology aspect of it, was how do we develop a curriculum program based on the technology that was available then, that we could build ourselves, et cetera, that could really deliver a research-based, efficacious program to, our first kind of area we tackled was social, emotional, and behavioral skills. And so, like a lot of other kind of engineering projects, in order to build that up and build it out, it was really a question of how do you systematize this core concept and information of social communication, which the grand majority of people get, kind of innately. How do you break that down and, start from core principles and components and build that up in a way that is engaging for kids, where they're not going to be bored out of their mind? The robot was a huge engagement tool with an ease of use that, special needs teachers in a public school classroom who are overwhelmed, who don't have enough support themselves, who have a ton of different kids with tons of different needs all at the same time. How do you build something that both physically can survive in that environment for years with little to no maintenance? How can you build, software and curriculum that's easy to use, that's engaging, that can scale, that can show efficacy, can show progress, and all of those sorts of aspects of it? And then how the heck do you actually go out and build a market around this and sell it? Which, that latter part, despite all of the research, the efficacy, all of the proof points, that was honestly the hardest thing in the end. Building the technology, I'm not going to say it was easy, but it was definable, and it was simple. Building something from a, sales and distribution standpoint that is largely a completely new concept and a completely new market into a space that is slow to move and pretty conservative in the types of things they adopt, ended up really being the hardest part of that business. And, with a lot of kind of false starts. And if you've ever, read the book Crossing the Chasm, or kind of know the
Yeah.
concept, like everyone else, we had those early adopters we found, and things felt really good, and then it kind of stagnated, right?
Yeah.
I mean, nothing special, unique, or new for that aspect of building the business. But, then it's how do you figure out how to get to everyone else? Um,
Yeah.
and again, in a space where funding is difficult, and, there's lots of
Yeah.
different buckets that need to be defined, and, compliance and it's in hindsight, knowing what I know now, it was a heck of an industry to kind of try and go and place this into. And so, over time, it went from, for me, being the engineer, the robot guy, whatever, to, going out on, sales calls, meeting with superintendents and special ed directors, and then eventually full on into state and federal level lobbying to try and help both allocate more funding, not just for our programs, but for technology and special needs, and just push that forward because that kind of segment felt really stagnant, like they were using stuff that was 40 years old and everyone was too overwhelmed to look for anything new. But then, that's its own entire insane process, right? Where you're,
Yeah.
learning to lobby after spending, a lot of my life developing product, essentially, to kind of be abstract about it, was an interesting transition. But, it kind of taught me to really invest more in relationships, honestly, in a way I hadn't necessarily done or even understood before.
Yeah.
And finding the right people, finding those advocates, in the case of the lobbying, who are, state reps, senators, assembly members, et cetera, and then figuring out, how to work with them effectively and making sure along the way that the goal was mutually always, we know we have something that can help a lot of people. How do we get it out there in the best ways so that we have the largest impact for the broadest swaths of individuals who need the help, which is both the individual kiddos that we were helping, but also
Yeah.
the teachers, the parental support, all of that along the way. So how do we build that out and kind of structure, whether it was the language of a bill or a, sales deal or
Wow.
whatever, in a way that makes sure it's hitting all of those elements and it's not just, allocate some money towards me and, hope it works out. Like, we were always really mission and outcome focused. And, in some ways that probably slowed us down at certain times,
Yeah.
but I was never willing to, and the team I built was never really willing to take shortcuts
Yeah.
given what we were doing, who the populations we were working with were. Everything was done with outcomes and efficacy in mind first, and then figuring out how to, get it out there. But, along the way, we got to do one of the largest autism studies, I think, still to date ever done. We did this incredible 3-year longitudinal study in the state of South Carolina, tracking, it was 1,100 kids basically, but really more than that, 1,100. We got to track kind of full 3 years, both in terms of efficacy and outcomes within the programs that we were supplying and supporting them with, but also seeing how a lot of those kids then were able to improve academically, in some cases, move more kids into mainstream classrooms, which creates better opportunities lifetime for them, and all these other things, without ever trying to focus on like behavior normalization. Let's
Yeah.
teach these skills, you be you, and but let's teach you how to kind of work through the process, because that's just kind of table stakes in the world we live in.
The collective wisdom and lessons learned from these conversations have been the inspiration for the business guidance system at 4Impact Data, helping CPA firms grow client advisory services.